Christine Jacobs. I'm the Executive Director of Represent PA. And we are the PAC in Pennsylvania dedicated to electing pro-choice women across the state with the goal of turning the legislature blue. And as we like to, remind everybody, we're there in the House. It's very close, but many doubted that it was possible in the 2022 elections that we could get to the point where we had a Democratic majority, and we're there. But now we've got to build on that majority, and we have to flip the Senate in order to make sure that the legislation that Pennsylvanians want and need will get correct. So one of the things I wanted to start off talking about is what's a core principle for Represent PA. We've talked a lot about reflective democracy, and I want to make sure that we all have a basic understanding of what we mean by that at Represent. The way I always put it is until and unless our elected officials look like all of us, whatever criteria you want, gender, race, religion, education, socioeconomic status, and more, we won't have the democracy that we deserve. All voices are needed. How many of us remember pictures from the Pennsylvania legislature or from the US Congress where subjects such as abortion were being debated, and you look around the table and it's all white men? And this is just, they cannot represent everybody. They don't have the experience and the feelings that you need the whole group to do. Represent PA's piece of reflective democracy is to focus on women in both chambers. But we appreciate and we strive for diversity at all levels and all the things that we talk about. The Pennsylvania, one of the things that we're really proud of is our role in the fact that the Pennsylvania Legislative Black Caucus now has 37 members from all over Pennsylvania. And we're so pleased to have the leader of the caucus here today. And so we're going to hear from Representative Donna Bullock, who's the leader of that caucus today. And, Donna says this sometimes, and I like to say it also. Although Represent started in 2014, our first victories were 3 victories in 2015. And who were those women that we helped elect in 2015? Representative Leanne Kruger-Brannicke from Delaware County was our first special election in 2015. And Leanne's been heading up the House Democratic Campaign Caucus and helped to lead us to the victories that we got into the majority we now have. The other 2 victories we had in 2015, they were Representative Donna Bullock from Philadelphia. And we're so proud. And in Philadelphia elections, it's the primary that we invested in Joanna McClinton in 2015, who's the leader of the House Democrats. So 3 strong women were part of that first class for Represent in 2015. And I'm very proud of that. One of the things that kicked off this discussion was that Representative Bullock recently announced $100 million in coordinated community violence intervention grants to statewide groups. Funding largely came from the federal government for the American Rescue Package. But Donna is providing the leadership for this and discussing what's going on in the state. This has been an important issue for her since she was first elected in 2015, and she's putting the force behind it and the strength behind it and the leadership behind it. And that's why, yet another reason I'm proud that we've been supporting her. So this is Representative Donna Bullock, who will speak to you today. And also we're going to have on one of our newly elected legislators, Carol Kazeem. And Carol ran against another Democrat in the primary, and then she had we invested in her general election race. And Carol is a community activist. And when we first met Carol, we knew that she would be a great member of Donna's, of the state legislature in general, and she'd be somebody that Donna could work with as she was interested in many of the same issues that Donna has discussed with us over the years. So with that, I give you Representative Donna Bullock.
Great. Good morning, everyone. And again, thank you to Christine and everyone on this call that has been supportive of Represent PA. Christine has already shared that I was one of the first candidates that Represent PA invested in early, along with Representative Leanne Kruger, and our leader of the Democratic Caucus, Representative Joanna McClinton. I would tell you that your support of Represent PA has, and your investment in those women that followed us has been critical and crucial to where we are today in Pennsylvania. As many of you have been paying attention to, it has been critical to where we are in our leadership today. Those investments have led to, one, a leader of our PA House Democratic Campaign Committee that has helped us reach this majority today, and Leanne Kruger. And your investment has helped us elect our leader and hopefully the next Speaker of the House, Joanna McClinton, and definitely has helped us grow our Pennsylvania Legislative Black Caucus. Today, the Pennsylvania Legislative Black Caucus stands 37 strong and represents communities from Philadelphia to Pittsburgh, but we have members who are neighborhoods in communities like Norristown and Allentown, Lancaster, Harrisburg, and we're so excited to have members of color from all across the Commonwealth representing their communities here in Harrisburg. We are also celebrating the 50th anniversary of the Black Caucus this year. So it is even more important that we recognize the history of women and Black folk in the Capitol this particular year during the largest class of the most diverse class that we've had in the General Assembly's more than 200 years history. This is the most diverse class. And so I'm so excited to serve with those individuals. What I will tell you is that our role here, or I will say our presence here, has made a significant difference in how we talk about gun violence in our communities. When I first came to Harrisburg, I immediately wanted to become involved in the PA Safe Caucus, which is the caucus that talks about gun violence and was mostly championing the legislation surrounding gun control and gun reform. But what I found sometimes missing in the conversation were the narratives or the stories from my community. Most of the conversation in the PA Safe Caucus surrounded mass shootings and stories that we heard in the news, national news, but not so much the stories that I hear every single day in my community. Just to give you some context, on Saturday, and many of you have heard this particular story, a Temple police officer was shot in my district. Just half a block and 2-3 houses down from the police station where I instruct my son to meet me at after school so that we have a safe place for pickup and drop off. Just note that every day I tell my son to meet me at the police station for school pickup. In that same location, an officer was shot. And then on Tuesday, while I was in Harrisburg and could not pick my son up from school and had to have faith that he can make it from school to the SEPTA bus stop, that he must take that bus back home. At 3:30 on Tuesday, just another half block from where that police officer was shot and murdered, 2 teenagers ages 13 and 17 were shot at 3:30 in the afternoon while I was in Harrisburg and could not reach my son because he was at Chick-fil-A with his friends. But all that I could think of was that he could have been possibly passing by the same block where these teenagers were shot on his way to the SEPTA bus stop. This happens more often than not. I don't think about gun violence just when there's a national story about a mass shooting at a university or a grocery store or at a concert or at a club. I think of this every day, and always. I am considering that the shooting I am hearing about is a block away, up the street, or 2 minutes away from where my children, my husband, my mother, I could have been, should have been, or would have been just 2 minutes later. That is the proximity in which gun violence touches my life every single day. In that same Saturday, on that same Saturday in which this officer was murdered, the shooter carjacked someone at gunpoint and abandoned the car right behind my home. I could see the car out of my son's bedroom window. And so we had heard helicopters way into the early hours of Sunday. But I would tell you, hearing helicopters is not uncommon. We hear it often as police are doing their jobs. I will also tell you, and I told this story often, and I wrote an op-ed about it, that it is not uncommon for my children to pass by candles and teddy bears and balloons on their way to school, and not because they're going to a birthday party, but because they are passing memorials almost on every corner on their pathway to school, to the recreation center, to the corner store to buy some potato chips and a soda. This is the reality that I came with to Harrisburg, and I think is with the support of organizations like Represent PA and others that were able to have more diverse experiences come to the table to share why we need to look at gun violence and other issues through a different lens. And so since I've been here, I've been working very closely with the PA Safe Caucus, and then in my various roles in the Black Caucus as vice chair and now the chair, to say, how can we make sure that the issues that are important to PA Safe Caucus, that the priorities of the PA Safe Caucus are not narrow, but also include what actually ends up being, and by definition, a mass shooting often on a very regular basis in the city of Philadelphia and elsewhere, where there are incidents where 3 and 4 or more folks are shot in one time or within one neighborhood. And so those priorities have been around lost and stolen guns. Those priorities have been around strengthening background checks. Those priorities have included red flag laws to make sure that guns don't get into the hands of individuals that should not have them. But it has also been making sure that we look at how we can support gun violence intervention programs in my community and throughout the Commonwealth that I know are on the ground working with those most vulnerable populations, intervening with likely shooters and talking to them and trying to show them how to better resolve conflict, trying to direct them towards more productive avenues, whether it's employment or addressing some of the other social services that their family may need. Gun violence intervention and prevention dollars are important. And Christine mentioned how we have advocated to increase those dollars. It started off with a $30 million grant, and now 45 million, and then last year $105 million that we have been able to put into the communities across this Commonwealth to invest in evidence-based programs in our communities touching our young people. That's important. I've also advocated for school safety and security dollars and have sat on the School Safety and Security Committee here at the Pennsylvania Commission on Crime and Delinquency to make sure that those dollars are distributed to schools and other educational institutions throughout our Commonwealth to make sure our schools are safe for our children. I mentioned I have 2 sons. They are now 12 and 15, Christine. I've talked about them throughout the last 7 years. They were 4 and 7 when I started. And when I started, my conversation was I wanted them to be able to go to the playground and go to school and not be exposed to lead. My conversations or my advocacy now about those 2 boys as they enter into adolescence and teenage years is I'm concerned about them being shot. That's my concern. And that's where it has grown. So whether it's at school or on their way home from school, I know that those 2 boys are my guiding star in the legislation that I advocate for, and the kids that they go to school with, and the kids that they're on the bus with, and the kids that they go to Chick-fil-A with after school. I want to make sure they are all safe. I don't want my boys to have to see another memorial on their way back and forth to the playground. They shouldn't have to. That shouldn't be their reality, though it very much is their reality. So moving forward in the Black Caucus, our strategy has been to make sure that our stories are informing the legislation. So how do we do that? We have been engaged in the PA Safe Caucus, and I have worked very closely with them to make sure that we had a member of the Black Caucus every year co-chairing that particular caucus with the members. So in previous past, it had included Representative Brian Kirkland, and now our current Representative Movita Johnson-Harrell. I co-chaired it for a brief moment, and then now Representative Anthony Bellman is co-chairing along with Representative Dan Frankel. So we want to make sure we are helping lead those conversations as we talk about gun control here in the Commonwealth. How else has the Black Caucus been engaging? We've been working with folks like Adam Garber, who's on the call at Ceasefire, and working with other community organizations to make sure that we are informed about policy. They're the experts in the policy, and we rely on them, and they help educate my caucus and my members and myself, so that when we go to the table and we go to the House floor, we're able to talk about these issues and advocate for the reform that we know is important. We also created a subcommittee on gun violence and public safety, which is chaired by Representative Carol Kazeem out of Chester. And that was important for me to have this committee within the Black Caucus to focus on those issues. And I believe Representative Carol Kazeem can lead that subcommittee and share her experiences and her constituents' concerns and be a great advocate for those issues. We continue to advocate for funding in the many ways that I talked about already, like the gun violence intervention, prevention dollars, gun violence task force in the city of Philadelphia to look at how we or how the city is prosecuting gun crimes and getting guns off of our streets, and the school safety and security task force. We know, at least when we were in the minority, the easiest way for us to address gun violence at that moment was funding the organizations and the programs that we knew were addressing gun violence in our communities. That have been important. I look forward to moving to a space where hopefully this year we can push legislation forward that we have been advocating for many years, Adam, and hopefully get them across. It's not rocket science. It is not rocket science. I go to schools on a regular basis, and I think from the second graders to the 12th graders that I talk to. In fact, last month I did story time with a group of second graders, and I always ask, if you could make up a law, what would it be? And it's surprising to hear from second graders in North Philadelphia that they very clearly understand gun control. And they're like, well, you should get a license to have a gun. And this is unprompted. Students are saying this. And, you talk to sixth graders and they get a little deeper and they say, well, I think you should have insurance, or I think somebody should be required to report if they lost their gun. They understood the parallels or the unmatched parallels of once I talked to 16-year-olds that I'm getting ready to get a car. I'm getting ready to learn how to drive. And I have to do all these things to learn how to drive, but I don't have to do those things if I wanted to own a gun or own and shoot a gun. I don't have to prove to anybody that I know how to handle a gun. I don't have to prove to anybody that I have insurance for this gun. I don't have to prove to anybody I have a license for this gun. And so those things is very clear to our young people that they understand the kind of laws that we need to pass here in the Commonwealth to make it happen. I see some questions. I'm going to go soon. Will the Democrats bring up gun control legislation? I hope so. I don't know what that looks like. We also need to understand that we have the House, we don't have the Senate, so we would have to find something that we can get the Senate to agree on. Hopefully we can find one or two of the three bills that I mentioned, or areas of reform, which is reporting lost and stolen, red flags, and expanding background checks or strengthening background checks. Those are 3 priorities for me, and I believe for many of my colleagues. And Adam, if I'm missing anyone, please anything, let me know. But I believe if we focus on those 3, that we can get one of them across the finish line in the next 2 years. That is my goal, and I believe many of my colleagues will like to see the same. So I know it is close to 9 o'clock. I want to give some opportunity for folks to ask a few questions. But what I would tell you is that work is hard. It is not easy. We are a majority of 1, but we will definitely take advantage of the majority that we have to advocate for and advance legislation we have been advocating for far too long, to hopefully make our communities safer for everyone, to make sure that guns are not in the hands of folks who should not have them, that we have some controls in place so that I don't have to be concerned about where I pick my son up after school. You know, the police station should not be the pickup spot. And so that all of our children can go to school or to the playground and feel safe, so that all of us can go to the grocery store or to our place of faith and feel safe. We should be able to do those things and know that our communities are safe from this type of gun violence. So thank you. I will take a few questions. I'm looking in the chat. So yes, Mary, in fact, some of the gun violence prevention dollars. So Mary's asking in the chat whether money should be invested in after school athletics, tutoring, music lessons, yoga trips, all those great things, right? All those things that every child should have access to. Yes. And we have seen that with some of the gun violence prevention dollars, that is actually what we're seeing those programs being used for. So whether it's a coding program that is bringing kids in off the streets and showing them some other avenue. I believe if we invest dollars that allow young people to find their passion and explore that passion, whether it's yoga, whether it's coding or esports, which is becoming very popular among young people, whether it's a dance class, that is a gun violence prevention program, right? Some children may need, or young people may need, more intensive support than an after-school program, because they're the hard to reach young people. They're not coming to the after-school program, but those intervention dollars are there as well. I think there are many ways to address this. One of the things I talk about is we see this increase in gun violence in recent years, and for me, and this is my own thought, I don't know if there's a study out there. I think a lot of that comes from what we lost during the pandemic. A lot of the programs that you're referring to, these after-school programs and other places of respite and relief for families, whether it's counseling, whether it's something where an after-school program where mom got the break, or there was some other resource that the family may have relied on, maybe even an after-school job. Those things were cut off from some of our families that were in crisis, some of our families that may have been dealing with other trauma, and they were not able to access those programs and places of relief and respite during the pandemic. And some of those programs have not gotten back to full capacity, even post-pandemic in 2023. When we cut those families off from those resources, I think it created a gap for many of them. And unfortunately, whether it's domestic violence or community violence and trauma, I think that it only fed into the loss of those services and resources, fed into the increase in violence that we have seen in some communities. Yes, so I'm looking at safe haven corridors. Yes, I so support safe haven corridors. I mean, clearly that's an issue for me as a parent personally, but I also participate when I can in a safe haven corridor in my community, walking young, very, very young children, kindergartners, second graders, from a public housing development to their local school. We call it the walking school bus, right? So we walk these young children to their school, which is about 3-4 blocks away from the housing development. I try to do that once or twice a month when I'm available, but I also support and have been trying to help fund fund another Safe Corridor program where there are some small stipends given to adults in the community to create those corridors so that kids can get to school safely. I am trying to read all of these great questions across the aisle. There are, but it'd be interesting to see if we can find the right folks across the aisle to work with. Right now, the partisanship is very tense, and I think we can get beyond the next 2 weeks of like who's in the majority, what the rules are going to be, and when the sort of where some of that tension kind of dies down a little bit, we can hopefully sit and talk across the aisle. It is still a challenge because there are some folks, even on my side of the aisle, who are pro Second Amendment or have other views. And so it is a constant massaging of what the legislation may look like that we actually pass. An interesting thing is that I did last year with the Black Caucus, and intentionally so, I brought in a group of Black gun owners to meet with the Second Amendment Caucus, which right now is mostly Republican, except for myself and Chris Rabb. We joined it to be, just to be funny. So we wanted to see what was going on in their caucus and to say, hey, we're pro Second Amendment, but this is what we think, right? And I think it threw them off a little bit when we joined the Second Amendment Caucus. They didn't expect these two Black Philadelphians who are slightly progressive, and Chris Rabb probably more progressive than me, to join the Second Amendment Caucus. And then I brought in a group of Black gun owners who I thought was very gifted in the way they shared their stories as gun owners, and then said, but the NRA doesn't support us, right? Or then said, I own a gun, but I know that if I called the police because my house was being burglarized, that the police may shoot me first because I'm gonna have the bigger gun, because I actually like owning my gun. But they also talked about the need for training. They talked about the need for having some measures in place, because as Black gun owners, but also as parents of young men and women, understand that their lives and their children's lives were also more likely to be victims of gun violence than others. And so to hear that very nuanced story from that group was interesting, and to have them face to face with the Second Amendment Caucus was very interesting. And I hope that that brings us to some other conversations about what can be accomplished across the aisle working with our colleagues. So faith communities can definitely help with some of the work that we do. I know that there are pastors that meet regularly in some of the corners in Philadelphia. We have a prayer caucus here in the House, and so we are a very faith-based group of legislators. So to the extent that you can engage from the space of faith and engage legislators who may not be willing to vote one way or the other, a place of faith, a position of faith may actually help move the needle a little. So how do we end the culture of violence? And given we are in crisis, what is the maximum role schools can play to end violence? That's a loaded question, Brian, but I would say that there is a lot of work to be done there, counseling, some of the social service programs and after school programs that are happening within schools and within our communities should be supported and funded. We need to talk about conflict resolution. We need to talk about anti-bullying legislation, which is something that we do early on. And actually Rep. Kinsey and I have a bill around anti-bullying legislation and teaching young people how to not be a bully, how to stand up and not stand down and stand up for others. I think if we teach that kind of social interactions and that kind of culture, they'll hopefully we won't have folks who resort to violence to solve problems.
Well, that was my question. Hi, Brian.
Hi, Brian.
I met you with anti-gerrymandering work years ago, but I'm focusing on violence, and I'll follow up on this. But the idea here is that public schools represent a 12-year, 13-year opportunity to reach children, and speaking about crossing the aisle, maybe a course in citizenship as a way of saying is giving kids all the tools they need to thrive and survive. Right.
Absolutely.
So some of the things you said are already on our list. The group I've organized to think through the issues of ending, like really ending violence, not just gun violence, which is enormous, but trying to get, sort of deeper. So I'll give you a call on that.
I appreciate that. I do think there's a bill floating around a citizenship course, and maybe there's some way to connect that work with what you're proposing. But yeah, I think there's a number of ways we can infuse the curriculum with things like addressing bullying in our schools, addressing conflict resolution, but also this broader scope of what it means to be a participant in society, right, and citizenship. So that can happen within our school community, but also the adults have to set examples. And sometimes the adults are the biggest bullies in the room. And what we see happening on the national stage and in the news all plays into how young people react. I will tell you, our young people are scared. They came out of a pandemic. They've seen civil unrest that they have not seen before. They are scared. And the anxiety and depression that young people are having right now is real. Some of us still deal with it. How many of us still work from home, right? But we are forcing our kids to go to school every day and deal with a whole bunch of people they may not like, or are also scared and also have anxiety, also have depression. So we are putting our children through a lot right now, and to understand like how we sit here and half of us may still be working from home or only going to work twice a week. I see a lot of you very comfortable in your home taking this call right now, but we're forcing our kids to deal with this every day. And I just think that it builds up a lot of anxiety that we're not addressing as a society. And we have a responsibility to our young people right now to address that. I'll tell you, kids are doing that. Kids are not feeling great. I see my colleague, Representative Carol Kazeem, has joined us. I want to give her just a brief moment to talk a little bit about her work in her district and how she feels as a first-year member. And I see that she's somewhat driving, so I want you to be safe, Carol. But I'll give you 5 minutes or so just to talk a little bit about coming into this as a freshman. You've only been here for about 8 weeks. So what are your thoughts? You're still muted. You wouldn't mute yourself again. Pull over, please. And she did.
Can you hear me? Can everyone hear me? Okay. Thank you, Rep. Bullock. Thank you so much. I apologize for my tardiness. Yes, I'm actually driving on my way back to Harrisburg. I heard a little bit of kind of what was spoken on, and it looks like we touched a little bit about the violence just as whole and gun violence. And me coming in newly, for one, just us kind of going more into the majority, I'm excited about that. I'm also aware, especially as a first-term member, just me even having to learn my way around Harrisburg and even just around the ropes of policies and what would look like amendments, what would look like bills, and even budgeting. And now that we're in that session and now that we are approaching in that season, it's one of those times where it's very instrumental and crucial for us, especially as we see violence that has been in the uprise and an uptick for a while. So I'm definitely looking forward to working with my colleague, Representative Bullock, and amongst a lot of other representatives to be able to work on the safety of our children. And I'm not sure if she spoke on it a little bit, but some of you guys probably are aware that, her and the rest of the Legislative Black Caucus did appoint me as the chair for the subcommittee that focuses on public safety, that would kind of look around, police reform and also the gun violence epidemic that's going on, and so other things that would affect us in the safety nature, especially around our youth. And one of the things that I was looking into, especially coming from a gun violence interrupter, that was the job that I was actually doing, and a trauma-informed outreach worker before I actually, all the way through my campaign, up until I officially took the oath. just focusing around like helping families with free therapeutic services, helping around mental health support, also hospital intervention where we collaborated and connected with the entire Crozier system. Sometimes I would even go out to Lincoln and Riddle and other hospitals where they would see gunshot wound victims, or even families or women or men who suffered around domestic abuse, even terrible car accidents that even contribute to trauma from maybe people that, you know, were hit from drunk drivers. And one of the things that I realized in the midst of my work was, first, when we started as Trauma Informed, it was more so the education piece and the outreach, which we went more into the communities as well to be able to inform them the awareness about mental health services and also therapy, and just normalizing it that it's okay to get help, but also understanding that sometimes our childhood traumas can also conflict into our adulthood. But in the midst of me going out there and doing a lot of that, one of the things that I realized is that we're traumatized as a community in whole. So even if you're not affected directly due to gun violence, as I'm sure you guys see in the news, just hearing through friends, families, even neighborhoods, if you're a business owner, when you hear those things, you think about, it could have been me, it could have been my child. And you know, we just go to sleep saying, thank God it wasn't. But it's still a heartfelt feeling when you think about families that are now dealing with that trauma and now dealing with so many of, you know, the stigmas around like not seeking a therapy, but at the same time being able to even open up those wounds in that door while even grieving, as we know it doesn't happen overnight. So as we were going, I realized that we needed gun violence interrupters because there's so many retaliation going on. So when people are dealing with trauma, when people are angry, they're so fueled up that now they're like, I want to go out and retaliate. I want the families to feel the pain that I hurt. And as we know, all that does is keep it stemming over and over and over. So it's a risky job to do because I've done it. But I'm honestly say, even as a mother, it was worth it to me. And I would like to continue to start supporting more organizations that are looking into gun violence interrupters, because what we do is we're kind of like an all-call support system where when there are certain crimes going down, or when we get the wind of the community where retaliation may exist, or where there's a crime that happened and they say, oh, we think that this particular community did it, or this particular neighborhood did it. Those type of things is something that we need to be aware of. So we can be able to provide the support that they need and be able to provide prevention and intervention methods that are in place so we don't, you know, see those type of communities continuously with retaliation. So I would go out in the neighborhoods, whether it was midnight, whether it was 9 p.m., 8 a.m., 9 a.m., and meet them. Talk with them, explain to them what those type of things would do. See what are some barriers that they're facing, whether it's around jobs, try to keep them occupied, try to provide support to the entire family, and just continuously being consistent. And that is the number one thing as legislators I want us to do, even when we're going towards doing a lot of the violence, which I'm sure Representative Bullock and myself and others would do, is the consistency. Because what we see is a lot of time these programs are formed, the funding is out there, but once they get it, it goes to more like administrative needs, or the consistency of the program is not met because they feel as though they're not able to fill in the gaps for funding. And then also another thing that I saw was we have a lot of more bigger names organizations that are getting majority of the funding, maybe because they're like a county named or a state name, but a lot of the underdogs, like those small organizations that I come from, you know, are the ones that are actually continuously doing the work, and they're getting the private donors and sponsors to be able to facilitate that work all for free and doing the most riskier job. And part of the gun violence interrupter is you go to the hospital and you go to them at bedside and you try to provide the support then and there and talk to the family then and there. And then you're basically following them. You're tracking them. You're making sure that the support that they need are continuously ongoing. However, everyone does not open up right away. But the goal is, like for me, what I've done was I still try to do follow-up calls. I still try to pop up at their neighborhood. And by them seeing that, they automatically know that, okay, she cares. This is something that I want to start being involved in with her. She's someone that I can be able to lean on. And I still have people to this day that still call me. So moving forward, I would like to start supporting more a lot of organizations that need gun violence interrupters, because that is something we don't have a lot of across the state. Trauma training, which is something that I had to do. And one of the things I did was I collaborated with a lot of police departments here in Delaware County. Upper Darby was one of them, because they started to see an uptick in violence, and they didn't have any therapeutic support. They didn't have any mental health support, anyone that was out there focusing on trauma. And I met with the lieutenant and the captain and so forth. And what I did was I connected with their liaisons, and we would go out there in the neighborhood and provide the awareness, the education, the support, and I would come together with the police department around their data. Which would lead into one of the things legislative-wise I would like to see is a National Violence Data Act, which I believe I heard someone talking about not just gun violence, but in all. But what I realized in the midst of it is that we're losing also our numbers, and we really don't know, even though we may hear in the news, we really don't know what crimes are really happening and how often it's happening and where it's happening. And the reason why I say that is because I know there were some crimes that existed in Chester City, but the individual was from Philadelphia. So even though the hospital documented, I realized the Chester Police Department did not track them. They didn't log it in. And what happened was, even if they say, oh, this crime existed, they never followed them. They never provided them any support. So now we have families going to Philadelphia without any therapy, without any mental health support, without anything, nor we weren't collaborating with organizations of Philadelphia saying, hey, this had happened here, but they're a resident of you guys. We want to make sure that they get the support that they need. So all that did was put them back in their community, and then they're coming back retaliating, or they're dealt with trauma, and then they're not able to work, and so forth and so forth and so forth. And I've seen the same with Philadelphia.
Yeah, and I think what you're hearing, I promised both of our speakers they could be off by 9:15, but I appreciate the passion they bring to this. And I think, I started this conversation today talking about the need for reflective democracy. And to understand, did you not just hear a perfect example of why we need it on this call?
Can I jump in, Christine?
Please do.
I was going to say that Carol has an experience that nobody else has right now in our legislative body. Her work experience is going to be critical to how we reform and change the violence intervention dollars that we've been fighting for and we've been advocating for, Carol. And some of the things you mentioned, I'm like, yes. So the next time I go to a PCCD meeting and we're talking about how we're going to distribute the next round of gun violence intervention dollars, I'm going to think about the things you talk about today. I'm going to reach out to Carol and say, hey, Carol, I need your guidance and information and experience as I go into this meeting to talk about the next round of gun violence intervention dollars. Because we want to make sure it gets to the community groups that are like yours, the violence interrupters. We want to make sure we have that cross-county, intersecting county communication that you just illustrated in that example. So this is the work of Represent. This is Carol Kazeem is that work. And this is why that diversity is important. And it's not just about being Black and being a woman, but it's also about her work experience and her lived experience that she is bringing to the Capitol. The other person we had that experience was Representative Movita Johnson-Harrell, who you also supported. And she brought that same level of passion from her own personal loss, but also the advocacy that she had done in the community. And now Carol is going to bring the same kind of advocacy and experience that we're going to look to her and say, hey, this is your lane. I need your advice. We're looking for you to help inform this policy or this legislation. So I just want to say thank you to Christine and Represent PAC, because I said it over the summer. Thank you for supporting Carol Kazeem and bringing her to us. I'm excited to have someone in our ranks that we can count on to help us inform gun policy legislation going forward. But thank you for just the support that you've done for women in general, but particularly when you look at women in the legislature and you look at Democratic women, we are the most diverse body or group of folks. When we elect women, we elect a diverse group of people. When we elect Democrats, we elect a diverse group of people, and that diversity informs our legislation. So thank you, Christine. Rep Kazeem, thank you. I know you are trying to get here to Harrisburg on time, so I will see you shortly. And thank you to everybody else on this call.
Amazing. We're going to continue the call, but I want to thank you both. I also always have to remember that one of the other pieces of our reflective democracy that Donna always brings to it, now Carol does, is they speak as mothers. And, we all have different triggers, different things that hits us. When Donna talks about her worries about her children, I always get to tears because I can't, with all the things I worried about with my own children, nothing compared to what she does. So thank you both very much for being with us today. I also want to call, and by the way, being in a majority is a good thing. Being in the majority means that they can have these conversations. Being in the majority is, and yes, they're going to look for people on the other side of the aisle to talk to, but being in the majority means you can have the conversations. And so many of these conversations have not taken place with the Republicans being the chairs of all the committees. I just want to give Adam Garber from Ceasefire PA a moment to talk about your event coming up. We like to partner with organizations across Pennsylvania to make sure that yes, we should get if you've got PAC money, yes, send it our way because we're endorsing these fabulous candidates. But Adam, what's your event coming up? Are you on mute? I don't hear you, Adam.
No.
Oh, there you are.
Can
Adam?
you hear me?
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, I might not be able to hear y'all, so this will be fun. We'll see. Technical difficulties. So thank y'all so much, and thanks for the excellent conversation.
We're still having technical difficulties, Adam.
You went mute again, Adam.
Yeah, so Adam, just put your
Adam, sorry, Adam, if you turn off your screen, usually your just the voice part comes in stronger. So if you call,
or just put your comments in the chat.
Hi, can you hear me now?
Yeah. Nope, lost you again. It's not working for us today, Adam, but just go ahead and put your comments into the, put it in there and tell us about your event that's coming up, and we'll make sure we have people to support it. Okay, we've talked about this. We now have 102 Democrats and post-election 101 Republicans. One of the Republican seats is now open because a Republican woman was elected to the Senate. They're going to have another special election, and these are the tough times, but we're very close on all of this. They're in special session this week to talk about, children of sexual abuse, and then they're going to come back into regular session on Monday, as you heard Rep. Bullock say. The Senate, we've still got a ways to go. Here's a statistic I'm very proud of. Women now make up almost 32% of the total legislature. It is up from less than 18% when we started in 2014. This is not all us. I don't take full credit, but I think Represent PA gets a lot of credit for making sure we endorse fine candidates like Rep. Bullock and Rep. Kazeem. There were some rules discussed this week, but they're not complete. Next week, when they come back into regular session, they expect to finish the rules. We're going to see what happens with the speakership that's under question, and they still haven't decided on committee membership. That's also under question. But we know that Democrats will have the majority in the committees. We know that the committee chairs will be Democrats, and we stand a chance of having discussion. The example I like to use to people is that up until like 2 years ago, the words climate change were never discussed at the Energy and Environment Committee, because they emphasize the energy piece and not the environment piece. They finally had an anti-climate change person appear as a speaker, as a somebody who came to the session, and they allowed the people who believe in climate change to question that person, and it finally gave them, the words were entered into the minutes. That will change this session. And it is exciting, and it's through our work and the work of all of our the other people that we work with. The Senate, well, we're still not sure what's going to happen, and what's one of the big issues, and you heard it from Rep. Bullock, is something passes in the House that doesn't mean it ever gets discussed at the Senate. We could pass the best gun control, best gun registration legislation, but the Senate may not ever bring it up. And that's why we've got to push hard. You've got to push hard on your senators, and we have to be worrying about what's going to happen next. We've talked about our campaign philosophy. We invested $700,000, and now is the time to work on building the next cycle. And this is the one I want to emphasize to everybody. This is not an off year. You know, people are like, it's an off year. We're not worried about it. Off year, we're worried about the mayor. We're worried about county representatives. No one's worrying about the legislature. It is not an off year. The House majority, as we've discussed, is too slim. Every seat counts. We made it to the majority, but if somebody gets sick, somebody decides they're going off and get promoted. Sarah Innamorato wins the election for a county seat in Allegheny County, and we're down another Democrat. Every seat counts. And in the Senate, if we could flip 3 seats, it would be tied. And with Austin Davis as our lieutenant governor and president of the Senate, we'd have the ability to put through legislation in the Senate. So let's talk about 2024 and think about what those seats are and which are the most flippable. There's 3 seats that are flippable, and we're trying to figure out who the candidates are going to be and whether there's people that we can support. So overall, to be effective, to be the kind of PAC we want to be, to make change throughout Pennsylvania, we want to invest $1 million in the 2024 cycle. At this point in the 2022 cycle, I had no idea that we could get to 700,000. Now I have no idea how we're going to get to the million, but we're going to do it. And early money is needed this year. So we need your support. We're looking for volunteers. We're going to start, we've just hired a new operations manager. So we're going to be able to start doing event planning. And oh yes, Debbie Gross, you're right. Judicial elections are this year. So I know you thank you for the commercial on that one. It's not an off year in judicial elections either. So we are paying attention, but that doesn't mean I'm not raising money for the legislature. So thank you all very much for attending today. We've got a couple other events coming up. Watch for announcements about an event we're doing that will, we've had the event before talking about the legislation, the court case that happened on education funding. Well, the court case came down in favor of the students, in favor of good education in Pennsylvania. But what is the impact that's going to be? We're going to have an event on that coming up in early March. And at the end of March, we're going to have a group of physicians on, including Ann Steiner, who's on this call today. But we're going to have a group of physicians on who talking about healthcare and what kinds of things that they would like to see done. And the question I have here is, do we endorse candidates in Democratic primaries? Yes, but we endorse, if it's an open seat or if it's a Republican held seat and there's a woman running in the primary, we will endorse if she meets all of our needs. If it's somebody challenging an existing Democratic legislator, we in general do not support unless there's a real reason that we want to make a change. But for right now, what we're looking for, I had mentioned these Senate seats, we're looking to see whether there's going to be women running in those that we can give early money to, so that when we flip the Senate or we could get the Senate closer, we have more strong women there. But thank you very much. Thank you all for attending today. Thank you for getting up and being with us. And I'm just so grateful to have Donna and Carol representing all of us in the legislature. They just inspire me to go do more work. So thank you.